Hey there, Portable for parents and students. Here's a little review of data management and graphing, which is chapter 3 in the math textbook. We did go over this today in class, so check it out. Here's what the grade 5s need to know how to work with. Pictographs, broken line graphs, interpreting a circle graph, a pie graph, but they don't have to make it, and different bar graphs with intervals, and a few other things as well. In grade 4, it's pictographs, bar graphs with intervals. They have to read and interpret a whole bunch of graphs, like a bar graph, a circle graph, etc., and also know how to make a survey. So some of the questions we want to ask are like, for example, why do we make surveys? Of course, make a survey would be to get an answer to something, get some information. We want to do some planning. After you've done your survey, made your graph, we often ask some questions. Tell me something about your graph. Tell me 3 things about your graph. Usually, what's the most popular, what's the least popular, are the easiest one to do. You might want to ask why. Why do you think this is popular? Give your opinion on that. One important part is, can you take a survey result and apply it to a new group? And I would say that within reason, yes. So if I ask all the grade 3s at Chime what they want to do for the playground, that will probably cover me for what the grade 4s also would think. But I wouldn't extrapolate that all the way to what the grade 8s think or maybe even what the kindergartens think. So that's kind of what that means. You can use the data for similar groups, basically. Okay, if we look at this graph, this is a survey about favorite sports. There could be a question on what are other related questions you could ask. Now, because this is all sports questions, then other sports questions would make sense. What's your least favorite sport? What sport do you play rep in, or something like that? Those are examples of questions you could use for that. Let's go to page 2. In page 2, we're going to talk about graphing and how you make a graph. And one of the important things is, how do you figure out what scale to you? That is quite a big problem. If you can figure that out, you're halfway home. So we wrote out what the steps were to figure out the scale. First of all, you have to take a look at the range of the data you get and look closely at the top value. Let's pretend the top value is 93. Okay? What you're going to do is you're going to look at that 93 and you're going to round it up to the next larger round number. So 93, if I was going up, then maybe the next large round number would be 100. So then I know that on my graph, the highest value along the axis is going to be 100. So how much is each individual steps? Well, I take that 100. Often a graph is a 10 by 10 grid. So I divide by 10 and I figure out that every step is going to be 10. So it'd be 0, 10, 20, 30, all the way up to 100. And that way I know that the scale will match the data I have. Typically in a graph, you want to make sure and use as much of the space as you can rather than having tiny boxes down at the bottom. Okay, so here's an example of some temperature data. This is a grade 5 question because they're going to ask for a broken line graph. Use a broken line graph when you have some data at some time points, but you don't have the data all from every single day. So you make a broken line to indicate that, you've got some data, but you don't have every single piece of data in between. So when I look at the data of the temperature here, I find the range was from 1 to 35. So if I go up to the next round number, I could use 40, and that would mean that my steps were 4. But if I go to 50, I divide by 10, that means each step is going to be 5, and that's a little easier to work with. 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. And the graph probably looks something like this. Of course, when you're doing the graphing, when you're doing a broken line graph grade 5s, I'm going to expect that this part is done with a ruler. I'm going to expect also that you have 3 pieces of labels on your graph. The X and Y axis are labeled for what they are, and you come up with some kind of title. And generally, there could be a question of what kind of trends do you see? Well, for temperature, it's easily in North America, It's cold in the winter. It's warmer in the summer. It transitions in the fall and the spring. Down here, we're going to take a look at perhaps a rainfall graph for a location. Again, I look at the range. The range goes from 0 to 350 this time. Sorry, yeah, about 330 it is. So it's about 330, not 350. And then I'm going to round up. I could, again, go to 400, or I can go to 500. Those are nice round numbers that are larger than the highest number. Divide that by 10. Let's say I use 500. If I divide by 10, then I'm going to end up with steps of 50. So 0, 50, 100, etc., etc. And because this is a bar graph, I'm going to label it January, February, March, April, and the bar will be built inside each one of these things like that. Whereas on a line graph, the labeling goes where the line meets the axis. Okay, that's that one. Over to page 3, let's take a quick look at some pie charts. Pie charts, they don't need to know how to make them, but they need to know how to interpret them. So for example, let's say in this question, there are 24 animals. How many turkeys are there? I'm sorry, this didn't photocopy very well. But basically there is 1/4, 1/4, etc. in each one of these sections. It's divided up equally. Now, if there's a total of 24, my job is then to figure out what 1/4 would be. There's different ways of doing this, but I need to divide 24 into 4 groups. Let's make a guess. Let's say, what about 5? What happens if I put 5 in each group? That gives me a total of 20. Uh-oh, not enough. I really have to have 24. So it ends up being 6 in each group. And that will give you my 24 over here. That means there are 6 turkeys altogether. It also says how many birds. Well, there's also 6 roosters, so that makes 12 birds. Same idea over here, except this time there's 36, but I have to come up with a number that will divide. I can divide into 36 divided by 3, or come up with a number that I can add 3 times to get me 36. Again, let's do a little trial and error. I'm going to say maybe, well, let's say 10. What if each group had 10 in it? Well, that gives me 30. I still have 6 to give out. So let's say I give now 2 more, and that will mean that there will be 12 in each of the groups. That's just one way of figuring out a question like that. Now let's talk about bar graphs that have intervals. Intervals means, for example, let's say I have all these values for a test. If I try to make bars for each one of these results, I'm going to end up with a ton of little bars down at the bottom that are not that informative. When we have something like this, we want to maybe group it together. How many kids really bombed the test? How many kids did really well, or something like that? In this case, I need to divide up intervals. Now, intervals are very similar to finding out the scale. I look at the range. In this case, the range is 0 to 47. And I try to use a round number to figure out the intervals. So 0 to 47, it's about 50 numbers, approximately. If I want five intervals, I need about 10 numbers in each interval. So the lowest is 0. It's got to be careful, but 0 to 9 is actually 10 numbers when you count it. So I'm going to go 0 to 9 as 10 numbers, then 10 to 19 also has 10 numbers, etc., etc. Sorry, I made a boo-boo there. So each one of these has a total of 10 numbers in there. Every interval has to have the same amount. You can't like have 10 numbers here, then 9 numbers over here, or something like that. If you go with 10, everything has to have the same. So then I kind of go through the numbers, figuring out how much it is. And on the bottom here, I say 0 to 9 is here, 10 to 19 is there, etc. And I start doing the bars. Now these numbers are quite low, so I can just do 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 for the scale, 1, 2, 3. And then I got a label. Here's the number of people in this interval, and this is maybe the scores that they've got, and I need some kind of title for a math test on top. Grade 5. This is all about changing the scale of a graph. Grade 4, it's been nice knowing you. You don't need to listen to this, but you're welcome to. Really what we want to do is we want to accentuate the differences. All these numbers look kind of similar. So it's not that interesting or convincing a story to say that, oh, they're all the same. If you really want to show, um, if you want to accentuate, if you want to increase the appearance of a difference in a number, then what you're going to do is just highlight the tops of the bars. So really, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to stretch these out to kind of make it look like there's a big difference in here. Here's the steps you would do. First of all, you would look closely at the range of values. In this case, we have a value of from 95 to the low to 115 to the high. We want to get rid of a bunch of the smaller stuff. So really, you're going to round up and down on either end. I'm going to say 90 over here, and I'm going to say maybe 120 on that range. And I'm going to chart 90 to 100. Now, 90 to 100, that is a total of 30 numbers in there. So I'm going to make a new scale and make a new graph. So I start with 0. Then I give this very important wiggly sign. That wiggly line means, hey, sorry about that. This wiggly line means I am cutting off a whole bunch of numbers. And then I go ahead. In my case that I did here, because I was doing 30 numbers, to make it divisible by 10, I said, okay, so every step might be 3. So 3, 6, 9, etc., etc. And then I did it that way. Hope that works out. And then I graphed it. I think in the classroom today, we had, say, a larger scale on that. But this is similar to what it could look like. Again, one of the steps, I looked at the values, 95 to 115. I rounded up and down a little bit. So that gave me, I need my scale to about go from 90 to about 120. And I'm cutting off all the other parts I don't need. And my scale, my range of values was about 30. So that meant if I made it groups of 10, if I made 10 steps, it would be about 3 per step approximately. Now, when I compare this graph to this graph, this one here looks a lot bigger. For example, Tuesday's killing it, followed by Friday. Come on, Thursday, you're way down there. But of course, I do know that this graph really is the same as that graph. So sometimes that's a trick. You'll see it in newspapers all the time. When you see this guy here, I know they're trying to accentuate, trying to make the difference bigger than it actually is in real life. A bit of a, not a trick, but a bit of a thing to watch out for. So that's changing the scale. Hey, boys and girls, that is a very quick review of some things you need to know for the graphing section. If you want to do some work, what would you work on? Well, I would work on the practice test. And I would also work on any review stuff that's in the chapter. There's the problems, there is the actual review section, and there's one more section I can't remember. But usually there's 3 review sections at the end of each chapter. Good luck. Talk to you tomorrow.